In the US, it all started with a desire to be needed. I had just moved, and every day seemed like a test. I wanted to be noticed, to be appreciated, to not be forgotten. I worked hard. I took on everything. I smiled even when I didn't have the strength. I answered, of course, even when I wanted to say no, because I thought, if I didn't prove that I was worth it, they wouldn't leave me. It wasn't about a career. It was about fear. Fear of being superfluous. Fear of being unnoticed. Fear of being the wrong one. I lived in proof mode. Every letter was like an application for acceptance. Every meeting was like an attempt to be needed. Every word was like an argument. I have the right to be here. I didn't stop. Even when my body asked for a pause. Even when my soul asked for silence. I was afraid that if I stopped, I would disappear. That if I didn't produce results, I would be forgotten. That if I wasn't useful, I would be gone. I remember one evening, after a long day when I had done everything I could, and a little more, I came home, sat on the floor and felt, I was empty. Not tired but empty. As if I was no longer there. As if I had become a function. As if I was not me. And then I asked myself, and if I don't prove anything, will I still be valuable? This question was like a crack. Like the first breath after a long delay. Had no answer. But I could no longer live as before. I began to notice how often I sell myself. Not literally, but emotionally. How often I try to be convenient. How often I am afraid of being uncomfortable. How often I keep quiet so as not to lose someone's affection. This was the beginning. Not a revolution. Not a change. But simply a pause. I no longer wanted to prove. I wanted to be. And this was new. I am Valentine. And I am learning not to prove my worth. Because it doesn't depend on performance. Doesn't depend on reactions. It's in me. And I don't want to live like an application anymore. I want to live like a presence. It was in a coffee shop on the corner of Fifth Avenue. I worked there for a few months, not because I dreamed of it but because I had to pay for my life. I was a barista who always smiled. Even when he didn't want to. Even when he couldn't. That day the manager came up to me with a phrase that sounded like a blow. You're not fast enough. People are waiting. You have to be better. And I stood there, my hands in my coffee, my heart in my throat, and I felt old Valentine wanting to say something. Wanting to explain. Wanting to prove. Wanting to justify himself. But I was silent. Not out of resentment. Not out of protest. But out of inner silence. Because I knew, I don't have to prove. I'm doing my best. I'm not lazy. I'm not indifferent. I'm not inadequate. I'm just human. And I don't want to live in justify yourself mode anymore. The manager left. I stayed. And something in me stayed too. As if this wasn't the first time I betrayed myself. As if this wasn't the first time I sold my dignity for approval. As if this was the first time I said to myself, you have the right to be slow. After my shift I went outside. New York was bustling as always. But I was quiet. I didn't win. I didn't win. I just didn't respond. And that was new. I remembered how as a child I was taught, you have to try harder. But no one said, you have the right to stop. No one said, you have the right to be yourself even when it's uncomfortable. That night I wrote a letter to myself. Not to my manager. Not to the world. To yourself. Valentine, you don't have to prove. You already are. And that's enough. This wasn't the end. It was a step. A step towards yourself. A step towards a life without proof. A step towards a silence that doesn't need explanations. Her name was Claire. She was bright, quick, beautiful in a way that you can't explain. We met at a poetry evening in Brooklyn. She read poems about loss, and I listened as if they were about myself. Something tender arose between us. Not passion. Not a game. But something that wanted to be real. We started dating. And I, as always, wanted to be perfect. Time. Without pretensions. Without needs. I was afraid that if I showed myself, she would leave. Because who wants to be with someone who has shadows? Who has doubts? Who has limits? One evening we were sitting in her apartment. She was talking about the future, about traveling, about plans. And suddenly she said, "You're always so easy. Like nothing bothers you." And I felt something inside me tighten. Because it's not true. 'Cause I'm not easy. Because I'm deep. And I don't want to be easy anymore. I looked at her and said, "Claire, I'm not easy. I'm just keeping quiet. Because I'm afraid that if I tell you, you won't stay." She kept quiet. Too. And that silence was more honest than all our conversations. I told her about my fears. About how I'd spent my whole life proving that I was worthy of love. About how I'd learned to be easy so as not to lose. And about how I didn't want to anymore. She listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't save me. And for the first time I felt, I don't have to be easy to be loved. Can be real. Can be complex. Can be myself. It didn't make us perfect. Made us honest. And that's more than perfection. I'm Valentine. And I don't want to be comfortable anymore. Because my value is not in the comfort I give. But in the truth I don't hide. It was a call from home. Mom said, "You're already 30, Valentine. Maybe it's time to think about something serious. About a car. About stability. About a normal life." I listened and felt the old mechanisms waking up. Explain. Down. Make excuses. But I was silent. Because I don't want to apologize for myself anymore. I don't want to prove that my path is also a path. I don't want to convince that my slowness is not laziness. That my depth is not strangeness. That my silence is not a problem. I simply said, "Mom, I won't live to calm you down." And it wasn't harsh. It was honest. She was silent. Too. And there was more love in that silence than in all the previous, "Yes, Mom." I remembered how I was taught as a child to be normal. Not to cry. Not to argue. Not to be too much. But I am too much. Too sensitive. Too slow. Too real. And I don't want to apologize for that anymore. I don't have a car. I don't have stability. I don't have a normal life. But I have myself. And that is more than any status. I am Valentine. And I no longer apologize for who I am. 'Cause my value is not in conformity. It's in presence. I worked at a media company in Midtown Manhattan. Glass offices. And coffee. Words that sound nice but mean nothing. Got a promotion. A new title. More responsibility. More expectations. And I was supposed to be happy. Because it's success. 'Cause it's proof. Because it's, you did it. But I wasn't happy. I was tired. I was far from myself. I was in a role that didn't have my voice. One day I was invited to a strategy meeting. Everyone was talking about brands, metrics, impact. I listened and felt something inside me tighten. Because I don't want to live in numbers. I don't want to be valuable through KPIs. I don't want to prove my worth through presentations. I returned to the office, sat down at my computer, and wrote a letter. I am grateful for the experience. But I am leaving. Because I want to live differently. I didn't explain. I didn't convince. I didn't apologize. I simply said no. Not to prestige. Not to expectations. But to proof. My colleagues were shocked. "You had a perspective. You could have become someone." But I already am someone. I am Valentine. And I no longer want to be a career figure. I want to be alive. I started writing. Not for likes. But for myself. I started living slowly. Not to impress. But for the truth. This is not an escape. This is a return. 'Cause my value is not in my position. But in my presence. Not in my title. But in the silence that speaks with my voice. It was a morning. Ordinary. Without a plan. Without task. Without musts. I woke up, made tea, sat by the window. And I felt, I don't want to prove anything. To anyone. Not even to myself. I didn't write a to-do list. I didn't check my email. I didn't look for something to occupy myself with. Just was. And it was new. Because before I lived in the prove to yourself that you're not useless mode. Through productivity. Through achievement. Through movement. But now I wasn't moving. I was breathing. I was looking at the world. I was listening to myself. And I wasn't successful. I wasn't effective. I wasn't impressive. I was alive. I remembered all the years when I evaluated myself. When I compared myself. When I pushed myself. And I said to myself, you don't have to be better to be worthy. You don't have to be strong to be valuable. You don't have to be nothing, you already are. It wasn't enlightenment. It was silence. A silence that doesn't need proof. I am Valentine. And I no longer prove my worth. 'Cause it's not in actions. Not in words. Not in ratings. It's in me. It's like breathing. Like a shadow. Like a light that doesn't scream but is.